Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. I just want to apologize, first of all, because you're not going to see much of me this episode. I don't know, some of you might be rejoicing about that, but there was some sort of an error with the camera card when I shot the episode initially, and I didn't get any of the video from the entire show. And this is a pretty long show, so I didn't want to reshoot the entire thing. So you're going to be looking at the charts for most of the episode, but I wanted to make sure that I actually reshot the intro and the end of the show. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure I redid the intro was because I wanted to kick off the show before we get into all of the stuff about Den of Thieves 2, a big debut for Red One on streaming, as well as a lot of interesting numbers and the stuff I like to get into. I wanted to address the situation that happened last week and is still unfolding in Los Angeles regarding the horrific wildfires. Conditions are not favorable right now. I'm hoping that between the time I recorded this and it is released on the channel that things have not gotten worse. But at the same time, what I've been watching over the last week has just been horrible to see. I lived in LA for 15 years. It was and is in many ways still my home. And many people are politicizing it, but that's really no surprise because it seems like everything is politicized these days. But I've also seen a reaction from some people saying, well, who cares? It's just a bunch of rich celebrities, which, first of all, I would hope that everyone would have the dignity to understand that no matter how rich or how famous you are, that losing a home is a traumatic event, whether it's a big house or a small house, whether you have $100 million or $100, to lose that place of security and those memories is just an objectively horrible thing, whether you can afford to replace it or not. But also when I hear people say that who cares because it's a bunch of Hollywood celebrities, that just says to me that they don't know anything about Los Angeles. Pacific Palisades, yes. First of all, that neighborhood was almost completely destroyed. It had a lot of famous people and a lot of celebrities that lived there, but I know the Palisades, and I also know that there were plenty of people that lived there that weren't rich and weren't famous. There were people that go out every day and work hard and worked hard to be able to buy a house in that neighborhood. And when you look at the community of Altadena, which was devastated by the Eaton fire, that is as close to a traditional suburb as you're going to find in Los Angeles. Many of those homes are generational homes, people that have lived there for 40, 50, 60, 70 years, people that are small business owners. You don't find a whole lot of celebrities that live in Altadena. And again, it's not that anybody is more or less deserving of your sympathy, but to write off the wildfires and say, well, whatever, it's just a bunch of rich people, that is not the case. There are people of all walks of life that are suffering right now and that need help, both on the ground and through people making charitable donations. On your screen right now are 4 charities that I picked out that I'm going to be contributing to and that I would encourage you to contribute to as well. The Los Angeles region of the American Red Cross, the Wildfire Relief Fund that has been set up by GoFundMe to directly distribute cash to families in need, Pasadena Humane, which has taken in hundreds of animals due to the wildfires and needs donations in order to provide those animals a home and medical care, and the World Central Kitchen, which is distributing food on the ground to those who need it. I think that those are all worthy causes, but please, if you want to research your own, of course, I would encourage that. The important thing to remember is that if you don't know Los Angeles and you think it's just the rich and the famous that have been affected by this, that is absolutely not the case. There are so many people that need your help. I don't think that people of means are going to be turning to these organizations for financial assistance, but there are so many more people that do need these organizations to help them through what is probably the worst time in their lives. And I also just want to quickly say, I don't get political on the channel very often, but I don't think that this is a political issue. When I look at what's happening to Los Angeles, I've had a few friends that had to evacuate. Nobody that I know of as of now that has lost their homes, thankfully. But the Hollywood fire that started, that they were able to thankfully get under control, one of the places that I used to live in LA would have been under evacuation orders. And then in a broader sense, when I look at all the terrible things that have been happening in LA, the freakishly massive wildfire that was driven by drought conditions that have become more and more common in Los Angeles over the last 10 years or so. There was a freakishly large tornado that hit my hometown just a couple of years ago. It missed my mom's house by 50 yards. It probably would have wiped it off the map snap if it had hit her house. There was another freakishly large tornado that came through the town that I live in right now. This house, actually, I had to delay moving in by a couple of weeks because it was still under repairs for the tornado. And then last year, there was a freakishly large hurricane that had Tallahassee, Florida, where Florida State is, where I called home for 4 years, in its crosshairs. It turned at the last minute, but it looked for a few days there like Tallahassee was going to take a major hit. And when I think about all these places collectively where I've spent my entire life, if fate had turned just a little bit the other way, many or all of them could have been completely destroyed by natural disaster. And they all seem to be getting freakishly large and freakishly more common. Once in a century floods or hurricanes or tornadoes are now becoming once every 10 years or once every 5 years. We have to take a very close look, and we have to take action and look at how we're treating the planet and the reaction, what we're seeing from this planet. I don't think it's a political issue because it's right there in front of us. We can see the escalation in all of these disasters, and these disasters do not discriminate between left and right, rich and poor. There's no gender discrimination, none of it. We are all in the same basket, and we have to look out for each other and look out for the only home that we have right now, because we, I think, are seeing what happens when we are not cautious and careful, when we don't treat our planet with the care that it deserves. And these things are escalating. That is just a fact. If you want to argue about the causes of it, you can. But the fact is that things are getting worse and not better, and we've got to do everything we can to get that under control. That is a multi-tiered problem that involves people that are high up in the government and in positions of power that I'll never reach, but advocacy and awareness and attention must be paid, because these once-in-a-lifetime events have now happened several times in everyone's lifetime, and it just seems like they're getting more and more common. So that's my little speech about everything that's been happening. Please check out the description below to find links to all of those organizations or research your own. But there are a lot of people, not just famous people, that need your help right now. And on a personal note, it's just been very, very distressing and sad to see what's been going on in Los Angeles. And my heart goes out to every single person that has been affected by this and continues to be affected by this. And I just hope that conditions, even though they're not great, will allow firefighters to get these fires under control. Well, as I said when I was covering awards season last week, it really kind of puts in perspective what I talk about here on the channel. But this is a movie channel, and we're here to talk about the box office. So let's take a look at the box office for this past weekend, which saw Den of Thieves 2 eke out that #1 spot just over Mufasa the Lion King. Mufasa dropped 39.4% to drop to number 2. It made $14.2 million. Its domestic total is now approaching $200 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is in third place. It made $11.3 million. Its domestic total is now over $200 million. Nosferatu continues to hold well. Unlike many horror movies that we've seen, it dropped 47.3%, brought in nearly $7 million. Its domestic total now $81.9 million. Robert Eggers is now looking for his first $100 million domestic grosser by a huge margin. Moana 2 stays in the top 5. It dropped 47.5%, brought in $6.5 million. It's heading toward $450 million domestically. In sixth place was A Complete Unknown, which essentially tied with Wicked for number 6 and number 7. There was only about $200 separating the two out of $5.1 million. A Complete Unknown dropped 37.7%. Its domestic total now over $50 million. It's also the highest grossing film for Searchlight since it rebranded from Fox Searchlight after the Disney merger. The Menu was previously Searchlight's highest grossing film under the new name. Wicked is in 7th place. It dropped 48.7%, $5.1 million. Its domestic total now close to $460 million. Baby Girl holding well for its third week, 30.6% drop from week number 2 at just over $3 million. Its domestic total now at $21.7 million. If it can keep this pace, it's heading towards being one of A24's 10 highest grossing movies ever, if it can make another $8 or $9 million. In 9th place is a film from India called Game Changer, which made just over $2 million. And in 10th place is The Last Showgirl, featuring surprise SAG nominee Pamela Anderson. It brought in $1.5 million. We don't really know what it jumped up from the week before, because box office reporting has been very sporadic for The Last Showgirl, but certainly its biggest weekend yet. and entering the top 10. Last week, we broke down some of the biggest hits and flops of 2024, and one of the things we looked at is the movie that had the best legs, which is basically you take its opening weekend in wide release and you look at its domestic total and how many times that opening, what's the multiple of that opening that the film was able to eventually reach. And Mufasa the Lion King has now become the leggiest movie of 2024. Its current domestic gross is 5.16 times its opening weekend. That displaces The Substance, which is in second place, and Conclave moves down to third place. Although I've been reading that The Substance is going to get put back in a few hundred theaters as it makes its Oscar push. So The Substance isn't out of this yet, but I think it's probably likely that Mufasa is going to be the leggiest movie of 2024. Again, that's why I said when it opened, because it was opened during the Christmas holiday, you can't jump to conclusions for movies that open just before Christmas because you just don't know what that crowd behavior is going to be. And everybody that buried Mufasa after that first weekend is looking kind of silly, although many of them wouldn't admit it. I took an approach that was kind of wait and see. I'm not saying it's a hit. I'm not saying it's a flop just yet. And it has held very well at the box office. Nosferatu has also held very well. It's at 81.9 million. That makes it the third highest grosser for horror films that were released in 2024, bumping Longlegs to number 4. Alien Romulus is at number 2, and A Quiet Place Day 1 is at number 1. A commenter last week actually pointed out that on these posters, 4 out of the 5 people on the posters have their mouths covered in some way. And really, you could say 5 out of 5 because there's a smile covering the mouth of Naomi Scott on the Smile 2 posters. So I guess that's sort of the new thing for a horror movie. Somebody covering your mouth with their hand or perhaps a fake smile. And Nosferatu is also working its way up the highest grossing chart of all time for Focus Features. Now, I've seen some media coverage saying that it's the 4th highest, but many of them don't count 50 Shades of Grey, which was co-distributed with Universal, but I do because the Focus Features name is at the front of the film. So 50 Shades of Grey I have as the highest grossing film ever released by Focus Features, followed by Coraline, which is actually at 116.4 million because of the very successful re-releases of that film, then Downton Abbey and Brokeback Mountain. Nosferatu is currently at number 5, right behind Brokeback Mountain. I think it'll easily pass it, and then we'll see if it can break that $100 million barrier. Burn After Reading, Darkest Hour, Paranorman, Insidious Chapter 3, and Atomic Blonde round out the top 10 all time for Focus Features. Wicked and Moana 2 have been locked in a box office battle since they both opened. Now, they didn't open on the same day, which is why Moana 2 doesn't go out quite as far as Wicked. But even though the Disney film is currently higher in the box office rankings, it looks like there might be some distance opening up. Although I think that Moana 2 is going to compare favorably to what Wicked has done in those few days that haven't been counted yet. Regardless, I think it's going to be a very close domestic battle between those two movies, although the worldwide battle is not close at all. Moana 2 is nearly at $1 billion worldwide. But I want to talk a little bit about Wicked because many eyebrows were raised when Universal opted to release it on premium video on demand on New Year's Eve, December 31st, just a little after a month after it opened in theaters. For people that don't know what premium video on demand is, it's when you can watch the movie at home by either buying it for $30 or renting it for $20. And Universal was kind of a pioneer in the early premium video on demand rush during COVID. They said they were going to put out their titles on PVOD earlier than any other studio. They had a dispute with AMC and the other theater chains, but Universal and the studios were able to work out a deal where if it opens below a certain amount, they can do PVOD after 17 days. If it opens above a certain amount, then it can come out after 31 days. And that's been the agreement reportedly that's been in place since then. And so Wicked was eligible to be released on PVOD, and the number that was reported from Universal was the highest they said for any film that they've ever put out on premium video on demand. So between December 31st and January 6th, Universal reported that $70 million was made by Wicked on premium video on demand. Now, according to industry reporting, 80% of that gross goes to Universal. So the studio got $56 million of that $70 million. And then according to other industry reporting, at least when this deal was initially struck, 10% of Universal's cut goes back to the various theater chains. So that would be $5.6 million that went back to various exhibitors. And that was basically to get them on board to allow them to put those movies out in theaters without boycotting Universal Films and just to kind of make the problem go away. Now, I've been skeptical of premium video on demand, and I think I've said so on the show before, but we really haven't had a whole lot of solid figures that have been released by studios as far as just how well a movie did or didn't do on PVOD. This is one of the first self-reports we've seen from a studio when it comes to premium video on demand grosses, and it actually gives me something to work with. And so I decided to run the numbers and see, okay, did this hurt theaters? And if it did, just how much? And to be honest, I was kind of surprised by the results, and it's made me pause and perhaps rethink my stance on premium video on demand, or at least on how it is directly impacting theaters. So the weekend after Wicked hit premium video on demand, the weekend of January 3rd through the 5th, Wicked dropped about 49%. Moana 2, which it had generally been neck and neck with, dropped about 34%. So I decided to run an experiment. Let's assume that Wicked didn't come out on PVOD, that it stayed in theaters only, and that the drop that it took was completely attributable to PVOD. So let's say that in that weekend after it was released, it had actually stayed on par with Moana 2, that it had also only dropped about 34%. Well, when we run those numbers, Wicked's revised weekend total would have been just over $13 million. That's up from about $9.9 million that it made with the PVOD release. That would be an increase in box office gross of just over $3 million. 50% of that would go to Universal because at this point in Wicked's release cycle, when you talk about box office ticket sales, about 50% goes to the studio, 50% to the theaters. So 50% of that would go to Universal, $1.5 million. That's $54 million less than the studio got from the PVOD sales. So obviously they came out way better by releasing Wicked on PVOD when they did, especially because it was over New Year's Eve, the New Year's break, people were home, they wanted to see the movie. 50% would go to the theaters. That's another $1.5 million. But if you're assuming that theaters were cut in for 10% of what Universal made on premium video on demand sales and rentals, then that would be $4 million less than they got from their share of the PVOD pie. By these numbers, both Universal and exhibitors earned more from Wicked's PVOD revenue in week one than they would have if it had stayed exclusively in theaters and had a lower drop at the box office. And even if, let's say, this provision has expired and Universal's not revenue sharing, theaters still only lost about $1.5 million across all distributors with the drop that you could perhaps attribute to Wicked's PVOD release. Now, when you look at this weekend's box office, Moana 2 and Wicked were roughly equal. We haven't seen a larger drop for Wicked, which I think may suggest that the dip from the PVOD release was maybe constrained to that first weekend, and we're back at a point where if people want to go see Wicked in theaters, they're going to see Wicked in theaters. I honestly thought it would be a bigger difference, but then I researched it a little bit more and thought about it some more, and really, Wicked was released on November 22nd of this year, which means that Universal could have put it out on PVOD, again, by the contract, the 31 days, before Christmas. They could have had it out on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. They obviously decided to keep it in theaters because it made over $45 million over the Christmas window. Universal, you could tell, thought that it would be more lucrative to keep it in theaters for that big, busy Christmas week, and I think that they were right to do so. And then after the big rush, they said, okay, we're going to put it out on premium video on demand. So I don't think it's a case where the studio was just sort of trying to pull the rug out from theaters. I think it is much more of a situation where they're looking for the point at which it is, yes, advantageous for studios, but at which they're also not completely crippling theaters. And when you look at some other movies that came out this year, Gladiator 2 had a PVOD release date of Christmas Eve. It dropped only 10% at the box office the next weekend. Twisters dropped on premium video on demand on August 13th, which is actually less than a month after its theatrical debut. It stayed in the top 10 for nearly another month and even jumped back into the top 5 with revived 4DX screenings in late August. And Oppenheimer didn't hit digital until November, which is months after it opened in July. I think this shows that Universal was willing to negotiate with directors, Christopher Nolan in this case, about when their movies could be watched at home, and was willing to wait if they felt like the situation called for it. Now, I'm not going to say that this is an equitable solution for both sides. Obviously, when you look at the numbers, premium video on demand is much more lucrative for the studios than it is for the theaters and for exhibition. And they are still potentially losing some money, and any money that they lose right now probably isn't great. But looking at the numbers, I don't think that it is a massive game-changing amount of money. Again, at least not when we talk about direct impacts. When I say direct impacts, I mean, how many people is it taking out of the theaters that were planning to go see it in theaters? What money basically is PVOD taking out of the theaters' pockets and putting into the studio's pockets? The big question that we don't know right now is how many people that would have gone to the theaters are now not going at all and are just waiting for the premium video on demand release to drop. I think it's likely that those people would never have gone to see Wicked, regardless whether it was premium video on demand in December or January or February. I think that's the bigger question for theaters, is how can they help to compensate for that? But when we talk about, there's a narrative out there, and to be honest, I kind of bought into that narrative, that putting something out on PVOD yanks the rug out from a movie and completely halts its momentum. And I just don't think the numbers always say that that's the case. I think that it may cause a dip at first, but I don't think that it reduces the people going to theaters significantly enough for the studios to ignore the upside. And if the goal here is for the studios to survive, they're actually doing really well here. This does hurt exhibition a little bit, but I don't think it's the kryptonite that many people, including myself, at one point thought that it was going to be. This is a new landscape that we're all trying to navigate. Premium video on demand is one of them. Now, whether that is a significant barrier to recovering, to going back to the heights that we were pre-COVID, I don't know yet. But I also don't think that it is the boogeyman that a lot of people might have assumed that it was. We have so much more to talk about on this week's show, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsors for this episode. This episode is brought to you by Chubbies. We're all settling into our 2025 routines, so why not settle into it in style with Chubbies? You may not know this, but Chubbies doesn't just make great shorts and swimsuits, they also make great pants, like their Everywhere pants. I've been wearing them a lot lately, and they combine the comfort of sweatpants with the look of, not being judged for wearing sweatpants all the time. I guess you could consider them fancy casual, but I just consider them great for any occasion. And if you're hitting the gym for the new year, Chubbies also makes great ultimate training shorts with split side seams and an extended liner to make sure your 2 to 4 weeks of working out will be comfortable and luxurious. You never know, they might keep you in the gym until Valentine's Day. And don't forget that Chubbies also has NFL gear for the postseason, featuring playoff teams that are still in the hunt, like the Bills, Chiefs, Eagles, and Lions, with more coming later this year. Chubbies is here to help you take on 2025 in style, starting with the comfiest, most versatile gear you've ever worn. For a limited time, our friends at Chubbies are giving listeners and viewers of the show 20% off with the promo code Dan Murrell at checkout at chubbyshorts.com. That's 20% off your order with the promo code Dan Murrell. And as always, be sure to support the show and tell them that I sent you. No matter where the new year takes you, Chubbies has the gear to keep you comfortable and looking your best. This episode is brought to you by Mando. The beginning of a new year is all about leaving things behind, those bad habits, that terrible diet, but you don't want to throw out everything, and one thing that I'm definitely keeping around in 2025 is my Mando whole body deodorant. Mando was one of my favorite discoveries of 2024 because no matter what season it is, if I'm moving around a lot, I'm sweating. So it's good to know that I have the confidence of not having to worry about how I smell, whether I'm building a snowman or mowing the yard under the hot summer sun. Mando's a whole body deodorant that's safe to use absolutely everywhere on your body, even those places you'd rather not talk about, and it's clinically proven to block odor all day and control odor for up to 72 hours. Mando comes in all different forms, solid stick, spray deodorant, and more, and all products are baking soda and paraben free. I use the bourbon leather body wash while I shower and the Mount Fuji solid stick deodorant after because I like to smell like both a jacket and a geographical landmark. But you can mix and match however you want. Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or deodorant wipes, and free shipping. And as a special offer to listeners and viewers of the show, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code DAN at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. And of course, please support the show and tell them that I sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. let's get back to the weekend charts and look at the movies that dropped out of the top 10 this week. Gladiator 2, which we just talked about, is out after 7 weeks. Homestead dropped out after 3 weeks, and The Fire Inside, which will likely be on Amazon Prime Video very soon, is out after 2 weeks. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, the biggest number is actually an addition of theaters. Better Man, the Robbie Williams biopic where he is depicted as a CGI monkey, that's all true, added 1,285 theaters for a total of 1,291. It had done terribly in limited release, and it did not do well in wide release either. We're going to look at those numbers in just a second. The Fire Inside lost about half of its theaters, 1,010 of them. It's still in 1,022. Kraven the Hunter lost 858 theaters. It is somehow still in wide release at 1,004. Gladiator 2 lost 419 theaters. It's in 1,329. And Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim lost 401 theaters. It's now in only 71 theaters around the country. But let's talk about Better Man, which is the Robbie Williams biopic. It had a budget of reportedly about $110 million. It was released here in the United States by Paramount Pictures. Now, they did not put up the budget for the movie, but they did pay, again, reportedly $25 million for the exhibition rights here in the U.S. It doesn't look like the movie's going to come anywhere close to that because it has not been a success here. So far, it has not been really much of a success anywhere, including in the United Kingdom, which is where Robbie Williams was much more well-known and much more famous. And this was actually an all-time, according to my research, worst opening for a movie budgeted at over $100 million that was opening on over 1,000 screens. This is the lowest $100+ million budget openings in 1,000 or more theaters. This chart may look familiar because Megalopolis was added to it when it opened to $4 million off of a $120 million budget. But you can see right there at the top is Better Man, which opened to just over $1 million off of a $110 million budget. And again, given those numbers, that is the worst opening ever for a movie of its size in wide release. It unseats The Adventures of Pluto Nash, which had been there forever, which made $2.1 million on a $100 million budget. Megalopolis gets dropped down to third place. The Last Duel is dropped down to fourth. And Missing Link from Laika gets dropped down to fifth place. So Better Man, not just a flop, but a historic flop for a movie of its size. And it's somewhat surprising because we have seen some music biopics that have done very well at the box office. Maybe that's what convinced the investors to spend over $100 million on that movie. And that got me thinking about you, the audience. Every week I ask you a member poll question. People that are members of the channel here can vote on this question. And I wanted to talk about music biopics and the highest grossing music biopics domestically of all time. Which one of those do you, the audience, think is the best movie? And that's the question this week. Which of the 4 top grossing music biopics, and again, this is by domestic gross, do you think is the best? We have Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the highest grossing musical biopic of all time, followed by Straight Outta Compton, Walk the Line, and I'm including 8 Mile because it is not a one-to-one biopic of Eminem, but I think it shares enough similarities that you can sneak it into this category. So which of these music biopics, the top 4 grossing domestically of all time, do you think is the best one? Bohemian Rhapsody, Straight Outta Compton, Walk the Line, or 8 Mile? You can vote right now on that poll if you are a member. If you're not a member, there's either a button, depending on how you're watching the show, where you can become a member, or there's a link down in the description below. You not only get to vote in these polls, but you also get early access to videos, including perhaps this one, as well as custom badges and emoji to use in the chat. I'd love to have you join and have your voice heard here on the channel. And let's talk about the question that I asked last week. We were talking about the highest grossing January releases of the 21st century. And my question last week was, which of these $100+ million January grossers is your favorite? And it was actually more of a runaway than I thought it would be. Split almost got the clear majority. It got 48% of the vote. Kung Fu Panda 3 comes in second place at 30%. Bad Boys for Life came in third at 17%. And Glass, the sequel to Split, came in with just 5%. I didn't think that that would come close to winning. I'm one of the few that is a quasi-defender of that movie. So we know what your favorite $100+ million January grosser is. Next week, we'll find out what your favorite high-grossing musical biopic is. Let's take a look now at what I like to call our road to recovery. The blue line is the box office average for the years 2015 to 2019. The red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2024. And the dotted black line is what we've done so far this year. And you can see that the box office totals this year were far closer to where we have been than where we were pre-COVID. It's slightly above our average since 2021, but not that much. And that's disappointing, especially when you consider that really nothing was hitting theaters in January of 2021, and yet we're still only slightly above average there. If we're looking to have a significant recovery this year, it doesn't look like these first couple of weeks are going to help us get there. We'll see as the weeks go on and we get into February, really, which has some promising projects, if we can improve our standing on this road to recovery. Let's take a look now outside of the domestic marketplace and look at the top 5 films internationally. That's all the markets outside of the US and Canada. At number 1 was Mufasa the Lion King, which brought in $27.9 million, followed by Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at $20.3 million. Nosferatu's in third at $13.7 million. Moana 2 is in fourth place at $11.1 million. And Octopus with Broken Arms from China remains in the top 5 at $10.2 million. When you take those domestic grosses, you combine them with the international grosses, we get our top 5 films worldwide, and 4 of the 5 are the same as the international chart. Mufasa the Lion King drops 46.9% for a $41.1 million worldwide weekend. Its worldwide total is now at just under $540 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has a steeper drop at 56.8%. It added another $31.3 million, did not have an impressive debut in China, for example, so it's not delivering in a lot of the overseas markets where you would hope that it might run up the margins. It's at $384.8 million. It's certainly not a financial disappointment or a failure by any stretch of the imagination, but it is not reaching the same heights internationally that it has domestically. Nosferatu dropped 48.7% for another $20.5 million. It's at $135.7 million worldwide. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera really leaned on its domestic debut for that number 4 finish there at $19.7 million. It's at just over $19.8 million worldwide. And Moana 2 drops 54.2% at $17.6 million. It's only about $10 million shy of becoming the third 2024 release to cross the $1 billion mark. Let's turn now to what I like to call some of our specialty charts for this past weekend. These are the top 5 per theater averages for January 10th through the 12th. At number 1 is Extremely Unique Dynamic, which made $38,207 in just one theater. It's a movie about a group of friends making a movie about friends making a movie. So, that market that it opened in, that was obviously the target market. Maybe they were all making movies about friends watching friends making movies. I don't know. I'm lost in it here. In second place was Every Little Thing, a documentary about a woman who cares for hummingbirds from director Sally Aitken. It made $25,733 in one theater. The Brutalist moved into 68 theaters, but still had a strong per theater average, just over $20,000, and it will continue to expand as Oscar nominations approach, although they have been delayed a bit by the wildfires in California. Hard Truths opened to $7,528 per theater in 22 theaters. Marianne Jean-Baptiste is trying to mount a campaign for a Best Actress nomination. And The Room Next Door rounds out the top 5. It made $5,564 per theater in 44 theaters. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, Game Changer is at number 1 with just over $2 million. That was a top 10 movie. The Last Showgirl is in second place at $1.5 million, another top 10 movie. The Brutalist added another $1.3 million in just 68 theaters. Flow, which is looking more and more like a lock for at least an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Film, is in 247 theaters, a big expansion for it. It made just over $300,000. And The Room Next Door stayed in the same number of theaters, 44 theaters, and made about $244,000. Looking at the 2024 fall holiday box office, this is going back a little bit. These are the top movies released between Labor Day and the end of the year last year. Wicked and Moana 2 remain numbers 1 and 2 on the list, followed by Beetlejuice, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Mufasa the Lion King moves up to number 5, which drops Gladiator 2 down to number 6. The Wild Robot and Venom the Last Dance are numbers 7 and 8. Red One is number 9, and Nosferatu is currently number 10. And we had a change on the 2024 annual box office. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is now the 9th highest grossing film released domestically in 2024. That bumps Godzilla Kong: The New Empire down to number 10. Kung Fu Panda 4 is off the list, and I think that Mufasa the Lion King will soon be moving onto that list. And once Mufasa does, those 10 movies are going to be your 10 highest grossing films of 2024. We'll see whether Mufasa ends up at number 10 or number 9. Looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, same story here. Any money made in 2025 still counts towards its 2024 total gross. Moana 2 moves up to number 3 at $989.7 million. That moves Despicable Me 4 down to number 4. Dune Part 2 is at number 5, followed by Wicked, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, and Kung Fu Panda 4. Mufasa the Lion King moves up to the 9th highest grossing film of the year, and YOLO moves down to number 10. I don't know if Sonic 3 has enough gas to make it to $479.5 million. We'll see, but it might be too tall of a task, so we may end up having one film from China on the 2024 worldwide box office. Still, a strong showing for American studio films, stronger than we've seen really in just about any year post-COVID. Looking at the 2025 domestic box office, now these are movies released in 2025. At number 1 is Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, so Gerard Butler is currently the king of the 2025 domestic box office, as I think he might have been 1 or 2 times before. Game Changer is in second place, and The Damned rounds out the top 3. Of course, the rest are TBD because I'm only counting grosses over $1 million for this chart, so we will start filling it out in the weeks to come. This is the 2025 domestic box office when you count all tickets sold since January 1st. Mufasa the Lion King has been the top seller of the year. It's made $61.6 million since January 1st. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is in second at $53.3 million. Nosferatu is actually the 3rd highest grossing movie of the year when you start the clock on January 1. It's at $33.7 million. Moana 2 is at $30.8 million, followed by Wicked at $26 million and A Complete Unknown at $22.4 million. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera enters the list at $15 million. That drops Baby Girl down to number 8, Gladiator 2 down to number 9, and Homestead down to number 10. The Fire Inside drops off of this chart. So that's everything that's going on at the box office, but we also have some just as notable news in the world of streaming. Let's look first at the latest numbers we have from Netflix. New ones are coming out later today, but we have the figures from December 30th to January 5th, and look at the week 2 number that was put up by Squid Game Season 2, 417.1 million hours watched, 58.21 million views. It's actually not that far behind the debut week for Squid Game Season 2, which is really only a few days. We're going to break down those numbers in just a second. In second place was Missing You, which is a Netflix series from the creator of Fool Me Once, which actually had a huge debut last year on January 1st. It's a UK mystery about a woman who finds her old boyfriend, who she thought was dead. It brought in 21.69 million views. Then we have the Netflix original movie Carry On, continuing its impressive run at 17.35 million views, followed by Squid Game Season 1. That's just how popular it is at 13.55 million views. The 6888 is in 5th place. Number 24 is in 6th place. It's a Norwegian film about World War II resistance fighter Gunnar Sonsteby. It brought in 8.84 million views. La Palma's at number 7. The Secret Life of Pets 2 hits the chart at 5.72 million views. The Grinch is in 9th place, and Virgin River Season 6 is in 10th. And when we look at 2024 Netflix weekly views, now I'm going to count Squid Game as part of 2024 because the week began in 2024, so there is a little spillover to 2025. But we had the debut of Squid Game Season 2 at 68.04 million views, and then the second week at 58.21 million views. Those are the 2 most viewed weeks for any program on Netflix at all in 2024. The second week of Carry On had this record, I think, for 1 week. It moves down to 3rd place at 55.1 million views in its second week of release. Damsel is in 4th place at 50.85 million views back in March. And then we have the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight at number 5 at 46.64 million views. So Netflix actually set a new weekly view record for 2024 in every consecutive week for the last 3 weeks to close out the year. So they had a pretty good December, and I don't necessarily think that they would have predicted that Carry On would be one of their biggest hits of the year. Looking at the top 10 most watched Netflix shows of 2024, Squid Game Season 2 moves up to number 1 and an easy number 1 at 126.25 million views. Bridgerton Season 3 moves down to second place. It almost was able to hold that record all the way to the end of the year. Fool Me Once moves down 1 spot, Baby Reindeer moves down 1 spot, and The Gentleman Season 2 moves down 1 spot to number 5. The Perfect Couples at number 6, followed by Monsters, Lyle and Eric Menendez, Griselda, Avatar The Last Airbender Season 1, and La Palma. So that's going to be the chart for 2024 as far as the most watched Netflix shows. We're going to restart everything, starting with the next batch of numbers, which are completely into 2025. Carry On also becomes the most watched movie on Netflix in 2024 at 149.35 million views, which moves Damsel down to second place. The Union is in third. Under Paris actually had a little bit of a bump in viewership over the holiday break. That was enough to move it up to number 4 over Rebel Ridge, which is now down at number 5. Lift, Society of the Snow, Our Little Secret, A Family Affair, and Beverly Hills Cop Axel F round out the top 10. And when you look overall at the most watched 2024 Netflix releases, so this is all programming released in the year 2024, Carry On is currently at number 1 at 149.35 million views. Damsel moves down to second place. Squid Game Season 2 is currently in third place at 126.25 million views. Bridgerton Season 3 is in fourth, and The Union is in fifth. Now, note that this says the top 10 most watched 2024 Netflix releases. I'm going to keep counting things that were released on Netflix on this chart, the same as I do for the annual box office chart. If a movie makes money going into 2025, I still count its revenue as a 2024 release. So I anticipate Squid Game Season 2 will be number 1 on this chart when the new numbers come out later today. And looking at the top 10 most viewed Netflix series since they started reporting numbers back in 2021, so we're talking about 3.5 years of data at this point, Squid Game Season 2 is already the 5th most watched Netflix series that we have data for. It comes in just below Bridgerton Season 1, Stranger Things 4, Wednesday Season 1, and then Squid Game Season 1, which is now approaching almost 300 million views. Bridgerton Season 2, Dahmer, Monster, Lupin Part 1, The Queen's Gambit, and Money Heist Part 4 all go down 1 spot. Bridgerton Season 3 is actually off of this list, and I think that we should be looking for Squid Game 2 to move up this chart very rapidly. So it was a huge week for Squid Game 2 over on Netflix, and I'm going to be very curious to see what the longevity of that show is. There will be a Season 3 release supposedly later this year. We also want to look at the Nielsen numbers. Now, because there was a week off during the holidays, I knew there was going to be a week where we doubled up, and that's this week. So we have 2 sets of Nielsen numbers for 2 different weeks. Let's look first at the week of December 2nd through the 8th. These numbers are delayed by about a month, and they cover domestic streaming only. These are the top 10 most watched streaming movies for December 2nd through the 8th. Our Little Secret on Netflix was at number 1. That Christmas debuted in second place, followed by Elf, The Grinch, and Subservience, which stars Megan Fox, in 5th place. Then we had Home Alone, which we often see at the holidays. Beetlejuice debuts on the list at number 7 at 6.2 million hours watched, followed by Little, Faster, and Run All Night. These were the 10 most watched streaming shows for December 2nd through the 8th. The Madness on Netflix starring Coleman Domingo is at number 1. That's a really strong number. I think it was just outside one of the best weekends for a series in 2024, 24.7 million hours watched. Bluey's in second place. Black Doves on Netflix debuted in third at 14.9 million hours watched. Bob's Burgers, Grey's Anatomy, and Landman are at numbers 4, 5, and 6. Special Ops Lioness returns to the chart at 11.5 million hours watched, followed by Family Guy, NCIS, which we see on this chart a lot, at number 9, and Lost at number 10. Looking at the Nielsen Top 20 streaming shows for that week, as far as watch time per available episode, The Madness drew a watch time of 3.09 million hours per episode, followed by Landman at 2.58 million, Black Doves at 2.5 million, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey at 2.23 million, A Man on the Inside at just under 900,000, and then the top 10 is rounded out by Cross on Amazon Prime, Special Ops Lioness, Tulsa King, The Ultimatum, and Bluey. But this latest week is what I really wanted to talk about. This is the week of December 9th through the 15th. It was also the week that Red One made its debut on Amazon Prime Video. Now, I've talked about in the box office portion of the show how Red One had a drastic underperformance at the box office compared to its budget, Well, it appears that a lot of people were waiting for it to hit Amazon Prime Video because it debuted the week of December 9th through the 15th with 35 million hours watched. That equates to over 2 billion minutes, which is how Nielsen actually reports these numbers. I do a little bit of a conversion. And it was good enough to take the number one spot away from Carry On, which had a great number here at 28.2 million hours watched. So in the US at least, remember how big we were talking about Carry On was? Red One was bigger, and by a fairly substantial margin. It ends with us. Boy, did people not know that week what was going to be happening with that movie in just a couple weeks? It Ends With Us is in third place at 16.2 million, making its debut on Netflix. Then we have That Christmas and Subservience rounding out the top 5. The Grinch, Elf, and Home Alone, 3 holiday classics at numbers 6, 7, and 8. Beetlejuice at number 9, and Mary on Netflix at number 10. So how big was Red One's debut on streaming? Well, it was the top streaming debut for any movie in 2024 at 35 million hours watched. That bumps Beverly Hills Cop Axel F down to number 2 at 34.1 million. Inside Out 2 is in third place at 30.3 million, and Carry On actually is good enough to hit number 4 at 28.2 million, with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire rounding out the top 5. So we had 2 of the 5 best debuts by a movie on streaming, again according to Nielsen's numbers domestically, in the same weekend. So not a whole lot of cannibalization there as far as different streaming services. Red One was also streamed on a week-by-week basis more than any other movie in 2024 at 35 million hours watched. The rest of the top 5 are almost the same. Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is at number 2, Inside Out 2 is at number 3, and Carry On is at number 4. Those are all for their debut weeks. Damsel rounds out the top 5 on this chart at 25.7 million hours watched in its second week of release. And Red One was one of the 10 best weekly streaming movie performances since Nielsen began reporting numbers in 2020. It's at number 7, just under the debut week of Encanto at number 6 at 36.6 million hours watched. The first week of Glass Onion is at number 5, followed by the debut of Wonder Woman 1984, the debut of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the debut of Hocus Pocus 2, and then the second week of Glass Onion. We'll see what Red One's numbers look like in its second week in a few days. Beverly Hills Cop Axel F gets bumped down to number 8. The debut of Don't Look Up gets bumped down to number 9. And the second week of Leave the World Behind gets dumped to number 10. The debut of Avatar: The Way of Water, now out of the all-time, or at least since 2020, best weekly streaming movie performances. We also had a change as far as the most watched streaming movies period since 2020. Home Alone moves up to number 4 due to its holiday bump in viewership. That puts Luca on Disney Plus down to number 5, and Elf jumps up to number 6 on the most watched streaming movies since 2020. That dumps Turning Red down to 7 and Elemental down to number 8. Sing 2 is at number 9. Glass Onion is at number 10. But look at Moana and Encanto. Encanto has been entrenched in that number 1 spot for a very long time. Moana is now only about 40 million hours watched from closing that gap. And let me tell you, it can close that very quickly because we see Moana on the charts a lot. So we could be looking at a change at the top of this chart in the weeks to come. Let's look at the most watched streaming shows for December 9th through the 15th. Black Doves is at number 1 at 16.7 million hours watched, followed by Bluey in second place. The debut of No Good Deed in third place at 14.7 million hours watched. It's about 3 families competing to buy the same house, and it's from Dead to Me creator Liz Feldman. In fourth place is Landman, followed by Grey's Anatomy, Bob's Burgers, Family Guy, Lost, The Madness, and The Ultimatum, Marry or Move On, the Netflix show at 9.2 million hours watched. Looking at the top watch time per available episode for the same week, at number 1 is Jamie Foxx, What Had Happened Was, which was his stand-up comedy special. Now, it was just one quote-unquote episode, which drew a watch time of 6.88 million per episode because it was just one episode. And some people would say, well, it shouldn't count here. It's in kind of a nebulous no man's land because it is not a movie, but it's not quite a series. I decided to include it because it is included with all the other television rankings, but I do acknowledge that because it's just a single special, that it maybe violates the spirit of the chart somewhat. In second place was Black Doves at 2.78 million hours watched per episode, followed by Landman at 2.29 million, No Good Deed at 1.84 million, and La Palma at 1.48 million. The Madness is in sixth place, followed by A Man on the Inside, Special Ops Lioness, The Ultimatum, and AP Bio, the old sitcom that's having a bit of a renewal on Netflix, at number 10. And actually, when you look at the watch time per episode numbers, again, it may be on a technicality, but Jamie Foxx, what had happened was, captures the number 1 spot at 6.88 million hours of watch time for its single episode. That bumps Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, down to second place at 6.39 million. Followed by Fool Me Once at 6.33 million, American Nightmare at 6.21 million, and Fallout at just over 6 million. We had a change as far as the most watched library streaming series. So this is non-original programming, stuff that had previously aired or has been acquired by the different streaming services. The top 9 all remain the same, with Bluey having an easy lead over Grey's Anatomy for the most watched library streaming series of the year. Really, the only change is at number 10, where Law & Order SVU becomes the 10th most watched library show of 2024, which drops Your Honor out of the top 10 after a months-long stay, holding down that bottom spot. And that's all I've got as far as charts this week, taking a look at just a few things this upcoming week in theaters and on streaming that you might be interested in. Tonight, and I believe also on Wednesday, it's a holdover from a release last night, is Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, which is playing in theaters. This is part of the universe being spun out of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, using public domain characters to build a horror universe. I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to go see any more of these pieces of crap, in my opinion. But hey, if you want to, I may as well let you know that they're out there. On Thursday, a couple of series that are premiering on Netflix. First of all, we have season 2 of Castlevania Nocturne, and we also have season 2 of XO Kitty, which did pretty well in their respective season 1s. Then on Friday, the big theatrical release is Wolfman, which is directed by Leigh Whannell. I will have a review for that movie on Wednesday morning. I'll be hitting the road to see that one because I really liked what Leigh Whannell did with The Invisible Man, and so I'm curious to see what he does with Wolfman. Also opening in theaters on Friday is One of Them Days, starring Keke Palmer and SZA as 2 women trying to avoid getting kicked out of their apartment. It is the debut feature screenplay from Syreeta Singleton, who is the showrunner on Rap Shit with Issa Rae, who's also a producer on this film. In limited release is I'm Still Here, which is a movie that features a fantastic performance from Fernanda Torres. She was a somewhat surprise winner at the Golden Globes. She's also looking to maybe grab an Academy Award nomination. It's an historical drama about a woman whose husband is arrested and imprisoned in Brazil. She's trying to figure out what happened to him, and Fernanda Torres is indeed very, very good in this film. Also hitting theaters again this weekend is Sing Sing. It's being credited as a re-release, but A24 barely released it in the first place. I've said too many times that I think A24 bungled the Oscar strategy for this film, and I think it might have cost them some Academy Award nominations, but we'll see if putting it out in theaters now maybe boost those chances. Also opening in limited release is a movie called Wish You Were Here, which is the feature debut of Julia Stiles. So she's stepping behind the camera. It's a love story starring Isabel Fuhrman and Mina Massoud. On Apple TV Plus is the long-awaited, by many people, second season debut of Severance, which aired its season 1 finale nearly 3 years ago. Ben Stiller returns to direct the first episode, which premieres on Friday, and he will also direct half of the show's 10 episodes, which will air weekly through March. And on Netflix this Friday is the movie Back in Action. Seth Gordon, whose last film was 2017's Baywatch, directs a comeback of sorts for both stars of this film, Cameron Diaz, who hasn't appeared in the film since 2014's Annie, and Jamie Foxx, who actually suffered a stroke, what we now know is a stroke, in 2023 while filming this movie. They star as former spies who were drawn back into the spy life. This is a tired premise, but to be honest, it's great to see that both of these stars were able to make it back in front of the camera again. And on Saturday, get ready to feel old because The Goonies is celebrating its 40th anniversary with a theatrical re-release, which I believe will also extend into Monday. Goonies may never say die, but the movie celebrating its 40th anniversary is a not-so-subtle reminder that everybody who remembers it coming out when we were kids is indeed closer to death. And that wraps it up. Hello again for this week's show. Thank you for spending most of this, 40, 45 minutes looking at static charts. I'm going to try to make sure that the error that I hit with the video card doesn't happen again, so you can at least see my face a little bit more, just to break up the monotony. Be sure to check out the description below to find out more about this week's sponsors, as well as to find those links to the charity organizations that I mentioned at the top of the show. And of course, be sure to stay tuned right here for more movie news, reviews. I'll have my review of Wolfman coming out tomorrow, as well as award season coverage. There have been a lot of delays in the announcements, including the Oscar nominations, understandably because of the fires that are happening happening in LA, but I will be looking at those nominations as they come out and as we move into what is sure to be a somewhat somber awards season. And of course, thank you for watching this show right here on the channel. I say this at the end of every episode, but please, especially to my friends and to everyone in Los Angeles and the surrounding areas right now, be safe. I'm thinking about you, and I am hoping for the best. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then.